What will happen to Christians after March 10th, 25? The secret of the chosen ones. Have you ever wondered if you truly belong to God? In a world where billions profess to be Christians, not everyone is truly chosen by Him. There is an unseen reality, a mystery that few truly grasp. The chosen ones are not merely those who proclaim their faith with their lips, but those who bear an invisible, yet undeniable mark, a divine seal that sets them apart. This mark is not found in outward displays of religion, nor in how often one attends church or reads the Bible. Instead, it is reflected in the profound transformation of the heart and the way they live their lives. Throughout history, God's chosen have walked a different path. Their journey is not one of worldly comfort, but of deep purpose and divine calling. They are not measured by wealth or status, but by the evidence of God's work in their lives. These individuals do not simply believe in God, they live in a way that unmistakably reveals His presence. Their faith is not a mere tradition. It is an unshakable foundation that shapes their every thought, action, and decision. We are now standing at the threshold of a remarkable period in history. March 10th, 2025 may not be the end of the world, but it marks a pivotal moment for those who truly walk in faith. The world is shifting, and the distinction between the chosen and the deceived is becoming clearer. So, what will happen to those who follow Christ? Are you among the ones He has set apart? This is more than just a question. It is a call to reflection, a moment to look deep within yourself. The answer is not found in mere words, but in the life you live and the transformation you have undergone. Those who are truly chosen carry 7 undeniable marks, signs that cannot be faked, imitated, or bought. These marks separate the genuine from the false, the truly devoted from those who merely wear the name of faith without its power. But this is just the beginning. To fully understand these marks and what it means to be truly chosen, join us as we walk through each revelation, uncovering the mystery and the profound truth behind the calling of God's people. Don't miss what comes next. It may change everything you thought you knew about your faith. Stay with us and discover the undeniable signs of those who truly belong to God. The signs of those chosen by God, a philosophical reflection. In the vast journey of faith, one question echoes through the ages. How do we know if we are truly chosen by God? The Catholic Church teaches that belonging to God is not merely a matter of religious practice or belief. Rather, it is a deep, transformative connection, one that reshapes a person from within, changing not just their thoughts, but the very essence of their being. Being chosen is not about privilege. It is about transformation. It is a calling, a path that demands surrender, discipline, and unwavering faith. To understand this calling, we must look for signs, not external ones, but those etched into the soul itself. These signs are not performative gestures, but profound shifts in the way one sees the world, the way one loves, and the way one endures. Here, we explore the first 3 signs of those truly set apart by God. 3 defining characteristics that distinguish the chosen from those who merely claim faith. 1. A transformed heart, the prerequisite to belonging to God. A heart that belongs to God is never the same as before. It does not remain attached to the fleeting values of wealth, status, or power, but instead seeks something far greater, something eternal. Consider the life of St. Paul. Once a persecutor of Christians, he encountered Christ on the road to Damascus, and everything changed. His mind, his purpose, his very soul underwent a transformation so radical that he could no longer live as he once did. He abandoned his old ways, not out of obligation, but because his heart had been reborn in truth. True transformation does not come from superficial modifications in behavior. It comes from a shift so deep that a person no longer desires what they once chased. The ambitions that once seemed crucial fade into irrelevance, replaced by a thirst for righteousness, a longing for God's presence, and a humility that softens even in the hardest of hearts. A reflection on the modern world. Today, we are surrounded by illusions of happiness. Wealth, fame, and power are often mistaken for fulfillment. Yet, if this were true, why do so many of the world's most successful people confess to feeling empty? Why do so many who seemingly have everything still search for meaning? In contrast, there are those who possess very little, yet radiate peace and joy. They are not restless. They are not tormented by an insatiable hunger for more. Their secret? A transformed heart, a heart that has found its worth not in the temporary riches of this world, but in the eternal embrace of God. To be chosen is to undergo this transformation. It is to no longer belong to oneself, but to Christ. And in this surrender, one finds not loss, but freedom. 2. An unwavering love for truth. The chosen do not compromise with falsehood. They are not swayed by popular opinion or the ever-changing moral landscape of the world. Instead, they hunger for truth. Even when it is uncomfortable, even when it demands sacrifice. Jesus himself declared, "The truth will set you free." John 8:32. But truth is not always easy to accept. It requires courage, for it often challenges the very foundations of how we live, what we believe, and whom we choose to follow. The age of misinformation. We live in an era of distorted realities. Social media bombards us with half-truths, conspiracy theories, and carefully curated narratives designed to manipulate rather than illuminate. Many prefer comfortable lies over hard truths. They follow teachings that align with their desires rather than seeking the unshakable truth of God. But those who are chosen do not fall for illusions. They do not seek validation from the world, but from God. They are not deceived by persuasive words, for they discern with a wisdom rooted in faith. They test everything against Scripture, against the unchanging moral compass that God has given. To love truth means to seek it relentlessly, even when it leads to difficult realizations. It means rejecting the easy path of conformity and embracing the narrow road of righteousness. It means living in a way that reflects not human approval, but divine integrity. 3. Perseverance through trials. Faith refined by fire. To be chosen by God is not to be exempt from suffering, but to be strengthened through it. The chosen are not shielded from hardship. Instead, their faith is forged in the very fire of adversity. Consider the story of Job, a man of great faith and prosperity. He lost everything: his wealth, his family, his health. Yet in his suffering, he did not curse God. He questioned, he wept, he lamented. But he did not abandon his faith. In the end, his perseverance was rewarded, his losses restored. But the greatest reward was not material, it was spiritual. Through his suffering, Job's faith was refined, purified, and deepened. A lesson from the masters of craft. In Japan, there is an ancient legend about Masamune, a master swordsmith. He was known for crafting swords of unparalleled quality, not because he had access to superior materials, but because of his process. His swords were heated in the hottest flames, hammered with unrelenting force, and cooled in the coldest water. Over and over, the process was repeated until the blade became unbreakable. Faith, too, is like steel. It is strengthened by fire. If it is never tested, never forged in difficulty, it remains fragile, easily shattered by life's inevitable storms. But when it endures suffering, when it withstands trials, it becomes unbreakable. The chosen understand this. They do not seek suffering, but they do not flee from it either. They know that every hardship has a purpose, that God does not abandon them in their trials, but walks with them through the fire. To be chosen is to have a faith that stands unshaken when the world trembles. It is to endure, not because one is strong, but because God's strength upholds them. A journey into the depths of faith. These first three signs reveal the essence of those truly chosen by God. A heart that is transformed, a love for truth that never wavers, and a faith that endures even the harshest trials. But these are only the beginning. To truly understand what it means to be chosen, we must go deeper. We must uncover the remaining marks that distinguish those who belong to God from those who merely wear the name of faith. Stay with us as we journey further into this profound truth. What comes next may challenge you, inspire you, and change the way you see your faith forever. 4. A deep desire for holiness. To the world, holiness seems outdated, restrictive, even unnecessary. But to the chosen, holiness is not a burden. It is a calling, a longing, a pursuit of something greater than oneself. Holiness is not perfection, for no one but God is perfect. Rather, holiness is the daily striving to become more like Him. It is the relentless effort to rise after each fall, to purify one's heart and intentions, to live in such a way that reflects God's presence in every word, thought, and action. The power of small acts of holiness. Saint Teresa of Calcutta understood this. She did not seek holiness in grand, extraordinary acts, but in the smallest gestures of love. She washed the feet of the dying, fed the hungry, embraced the untouchable. Her life was not about seeking recognition, but about living in such a way that no one could deny the presence of Christ within her. The chosen do not measure holiness by how much they have done, but by how much love they pour into each act. Whether in a quiet sacrifice, a moment of patience, or an act of unseen kindness, holiness is not found in outward display, but in the quiet depths of a heart devoted to God. Holiness is not about isolation from the world, but transformation within it. The chosen do not run from the world. They walk through it, unshaken, carrying the light of God into the darkest places. 5. A life of powerful prayer. For those truly chosen by God, prayer is not an occasional plea in times of trouble, nor a religious duty performed out of obligation. Prayer is breath, it is life, it is the very heartbeat of their existence. Like Daniel, who continued to pray even when it meant facing the lion's den, the chosen do not let fear, distraction, or the demands of life pull them away from their communion with God. They know that without prayer, they are powerless. Prayer in the age of distractions. In today's digital world, attention is the most valuable currency. People spend hours scrolling through social media, consumed by a constant stream of distractions. The chosen, however, refuse to be enslaved by this. Instead of seeking validation from the world, they seek the voice of God. To them, prayer is not just something they do, it is something they are. They carry a posture of prayer into every moment, whispering to God in their struggles, thanking Him in their joys, seeking Him in their uncertainties. A life of prayer is not a life free of hardship, but a life where no hardship is faced alone. The chosen are not those who have fewer struggles, but those who are never without strength because their souls are anchored in God's presence. 6. The fruit of the Spirit, an unmistakable mark. You will know a tree by its fruit, and you will know the chosen by the evidence of the Spirit at work within them. True faith cannot be hidden. It is not in words alone, nor in outward displays of religiosity, but in the very essence of a person's being. The chosen do not have to declare who they are. Their lives declare it for them. What cannot be imitated: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These are not mere virtues. They are the undeniable proof of a heart that belongs to God. The world admires wealth, power, and success, but these are not the marks of the chosen. It is not how much they own, but but how much they love that defines them. It is not their influence in the world, but the peace they carry within that sets them apart. In a world filled with anger, they radiate peace. In a society driven by selfish ambition, they are selfless. In an age of pride, they walk in humility. These things cannot be faked, cannot be forced. They are the natural result of a life surrendered to the Holy Spirit. The chosen are not perfect, but they are transformed. The fruit of the Spirit is the undeniable sign that God is within them. 7. The seal of God, a divine assurance. The final and most sacred mark of the chosen is the seal of God Himself. Do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Ephesians chapter 4:30. To be sealed by God is to belong to Him beyond doubt. It is not a physical mark, but a spiritual reality, an eternal assurance that those who are truly His will never be abandoned. A mark that cannot be erased. Throughout Scripture, God has always marked His people. In the Old Testament, Israel was set apart by divine law and covenant. In the New Testament, believers were sealed with the Holy Spirit as a guarantee of their salvation. The world marks people by status, by wealth, by reputation. But the mark of God is different. It is unseen yet undeniable. It is what gives the chosen strength in their trials, peace in uncertainty, and courage when the world turns against them. Those who are sealed by God do not live in fear. They know that nothing, no hardship, no failure, no force of darkness can take them from the hands of their Creator. Their destiny is not determined by the world, but by the one who called them by name. A call to reflection. These final 4 marks complete the picture of what it means to be truly chosen by God. A heart that longs for holiness, not perfection, but daily surrender. A life of prayer rooted in God rather than the distractions of the world. The undeniable fruit of the Spirit, evidence that God is alive within them. And above all, the seal of God, a mark of eternal belonging. To be chosen is not to be superior. It is not a privilege to be claimed, but a responsibility to be embraced. It is a journey, not a destination. And now the question remains, do these marks define you? If not, know that the invitation is still open. God is not looking for the perfect, but for the willing. This is not the end of the journey. It is only the beginning. Stay with us as we go deeper into the mysteries of faith, uncovering what it truly means to walk as one of the chosen. Misconceptions about being chosen by God. A deeper reflection. To be chosen by God is not a privilege of ease, nor a badge of superiority. It is not an exemption from suffering, nor a title that guarantees a life of earthly blessings. Yet many misunderstand what it truly means to walk as one of the chosen. They assume that being set apart by God comes with a life free from struggle, a path paved with divine favor, and a guarantee of moral perfection. But Scripture and history tell us otherwise. Being chosen is not about escaping hardship. It is about enduring it with faith. It is not about never failing. It is about rising again after every fall. It is not about carrying a name. It is about living a life that reflects God's presence. Here, we uncover 3 common misconceptions about those who are truly called by God. 1. Being chosen does not mean life will be easy. Some believe that if they are truly chosen, their lives will be free of trials, filled only with prosperity and divine favor. But Jesus Himself shattered this illusion when He said, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." John 16:33. The chosen are not promised a life of ease. They are promised a life of purpose. And purpose often comes with suffering. Look at the lives of the saints. Many of them were ridiculed, persecuted, and even martyred for their faith. Their calling did not shield them from pain. It demanded their unwavering endurance. True faith is not proven in comfort, but in trial. Those who are truly chosen do not avoid suffering. They are refined by it. 2. Being chosen does not mean being perfect. To be chosen is not to be without fault. Even the greatest men and women of faith stumbled. Consider St. Peter. He was passionate, but impulsive. He was bold, but fearful. He swore his allegiance to Christ, yet denied him 3 times. And yet, Jesus did not reject him. Instead, he restored him and made him the rock upon which the church was built. This is the beauty of divine selection. God does not call the perfect. He perfects the called. The chosen are not those who never fail, but those who, despite their failures, continue to walk toward God. 3. Being chosen is not about a name. It is about a life. Many assume that simply calling themselves Christian is enough to make them chosen. But Jesus himself warned, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven." Matthew 7:21. Faith is not just a title. It is a way of living. A name without substance is empty. The chosen do not merely say they follow Christ. They live in a way that makes it undeniable. Even today, many wear the name Christian, but live in a way that contradicts Christ's teachings. They seek comfort over sacrifice, approval over truth, and self over surrender. But being chosen is not about outward identity. It is about inward transformation. A call to reflection. To be chosen is not to be given an easier path. It is to be given the strength to walk the narrow one. It is not about never making mistakes. It is about never ceasing to grow. It is not just about bearing the name of Christ. It is about bearing the cross of Christ. So now ask yourself, are you truly living as one of the chosen, or are you merely carrying the name? This is only the beginning of the journey. Stay with us as we continue to uncover the profound truth of what it means to belong to God. Living as the chosen in the modern world. To be chosen by God is not to be called out of the world, but to be sent into it with purpose. It is not a retreat into isolation, but a transformation from within. In an age of distraction, materialism, and moral ambiguity, the challenge is not just to believe, but to live in a way that reflects that belief. The modern world presents unique challenges to faith. Temptations more subtle, distractions more pervasive, ideologies more persuasive. Yet, those truly chosen do not conform to the world. They rise above it. Their calling is not to escape reality, but to illuminate it with truth. How, then, does one live as a chosen one in today's society? 1. Facing a world of temptations. Faith is no longer merely tested by persecution. It is tested by comfort. In a world dominated by technology, social media, and instant gratification, distractions have replaced direct opposition. The internet offers endless diversions. News and entertainment shape perspectives. Social platforms redefine identity and worth. The world tells us that success is measured by wealth, popularity, and power. But the chosen know that true fulfillment is not found in status, but in surrender to God. How does one hold on to faith in an age where everything competes for attention? The answer is discipline. Those who are chosen must learn to quiet the noise, to be still before God, to seek Him not just when convenient, but as a way of life. Their faith is not dictated by culture. It is rooted in the eternal. 2. Being different, yet not separate. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Matthew 5:14. God does not call His people to withdraw from the world, but to transform it. The chosen are not meant to live in spiritual exile, but in engagement, with a presence so undeniable that it shifts the atmosphere around them. To be set apart does not mean to be distant, it means to be distinct. The chosen live among the world, but are not swayed by it. They work, build, and lead, not as the world does for self-gain, but as Christ did for the kingdom. Where there is darkness, they bring light. Where there is deception, they bring truth. Where there is hatred, they bring love. Their difference is not in rejection of the world, but in redemption of it. 3. Wealth and success. As servants, not masters. To be chosen does not mean to reject success. It means to redefine it. Money is not evil, but the love of it corrupts. Power is not sinful, but the misuse of it destroys. Those who are truly chosen understand that wealth is not an idol to be worshipped, but a tool to be used for greater good. Consider the Christian entrepreneurs who build businesses not for greed, but for service. The leaders who use influence not for self-glory, but for justice. The individuals who see success not as a personal trophy, but as an opportunity to bless others. The chosen do not chase riches, they chase purpose. They do not hoard wealth, they steward it. They are not defined by what they have, but by what they give. A call to live differently. To be chosen in today's world is not easy, but it is necessary. It is to stand firm when others waver. It is to live with conviction in an age of compromise. It is to remain faithful, not just in moments of worship, but in every aspect of life. The world is watching. The question is not whether you are seen, but what you reveal. Do you reflect the culture, or do you reflect Christ? This is not the end, it is only the beginning. Stay with us as we continue to uncover the calling of those who are truly set apart. Signs of the times. Where are we headed? The world is shifting, the tides of history are turning, and for those who are attentive, the signs are unmistakable. We live in an era of profound transformation, one where faith is tested, where truth is challenged, and where the distinction between those who are truly chosen and those who merely wear the name of faith is becoming clearer. This is not the first time humanity has faced such a crossroads, but in each generation there comes a moment of decision, a moment when the faithful must choose to remain asleep or to awaken, to conform or to stand apart, to drift with the current or to anchor themselves in the eternal. 1. The church faces new challenges. Persecution is no longer confined to the pages of history. Around the world, religious oppression continues, sometimes blatant, sometimes subtle. Faith is mocked, marginalized, and in many places, criminalized. Believers face not just physical persecution, but ideological warfare, where biblical truth is distorted, redefined, or dismissed entirely. But the greatest danger is not external, it is internal. Many within the church grow complacent, trading conviction for comfort, exchanging the unshakable truths of Scripture for the shifting values of culture. The battle is not merely against opposition, but against apathy. Now, more than ever, the chosen must rise, not in aggression, but in unyielding faith, not in fear, but in boldness. 2. A biblical warning, the call to wake up. The Scriptures have long spoken of a time when deception would increase, when people would seek teachings that align with their desires rather than with truth. In Timothy chapter 4:3. A time when darkness would disguise itself as light and many would be led astray. Are we not witnessing this today? A world where morality is rewritten, where truth is relative, where self is placed above God. These are not just cultural shifts, they are spiritual realities, signs that echo the warnings given in the Word. But every warning comes with an invitation. God is not silent. He calls out to those who will listen, those who will awaken from spiritual slumber, those who will stand in faith even when the world turns away. The question is, are we listening? 3. Which path will you choose? This is not just another message. It is not just another discussion on faith. It is a call, a moment of decision. Will you continue as before, living a faith of routine, or will you embrace the radical transformation of being truly chosen? Will you drift in the current of the world, or will you anchor yourself in God's unshakable truth? Being chosen is not about waiting for change. It is about becoming the change. It is about stepping into the identity God has given you, about living a life that cannot be ignored, about shining so brightly that the world cannot deny the presence of Christ within you. The world is watching. The time is now. Conclusion: the journey of the chosen. Everything we have explored is only the beginning. Being chosen is not a title. It is a lifelong journey, a road filled with trials, but also overflowing with grace. To be chosen is to walk a path that is not easy, but is worth it. It is to face the fire and come out refined. It is to surrender, and in doing so, to find true freedom. So now the question remains: are you ready? If you are, then do not turn back. Step forward. Stay with us as we continue to uncover the deep and life-changing truths of what it means to belong fully to God. Follow along. This journey is just beginning.